But we're here today with Chess Bedsole. He's a candidate for the started to call you Secretary of State. That's how many people I've seen this way. You don't want no part of that, but Attorney General. And it's one of those jobs that a lot of people really don't appreciate what all goes into it, and why somebody would want to serve with that kind of responsibility. So tell us a little bit about that and what you think, what your vision is for the position.
Sure, and let me just tell you, I usually start out with my first brush with the office, and here's what it is. January 2017, I'm at work. It's about 10:15 in the morning, and I get a phone call. My cell phone rings, and I pick it up, and the voice on the other end of the line says, "This is Governor Bentley's office. We were wondering if you'd like to interview for the position of Attorney General." And I didn't know the phone call was coming, and I was shocked. And I
thought it was a prank?
No, I knew it wasn't a prank. It was a terrible thing. And so I told them no. And then they pushed back and said, "Well, we understand you really want to do this job." And I said, "I do want to do the job, which is why I can't take the interview, because I cannot be involved with public corruption, and I'm not going to recuse off the biggest public corruption cases that office has probably ever had. So thanks, but no thanks," and I hang up on them. And here's my reality. I was then working for President Trump, and so my title at the time was Senior Counsel for the incoming DOJ. And so I had to go and explain to the FBI agent that, hey, I just got offered something of value from a guy that's under criminal investigation by us. And I told him no, and the phone call was under a minute, but what do I do? And he said, "Well, we have a process for that. Come with me." And we go find the ethics officer. And the ethics officer says, "You know, we have to do a review and make sure that you're an okay guy, but we know you're a good guy, so this shouldn't be too bad. But here's the thing, Chess, you're not a special counsel in the sense that we can stick you in a corner and let you work on some unrelated matter. You're basically touching everything, so you've got to leave while we do this." And to make it really extra special, when you are a lawyer married to another lawyer, you file your ethics returns jointly. And so if I am under review, that can mess up my wife as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, met her first day of law school down at Alabama. So I call up my wife from the sidewalk outside, and I say, "What happened?" And she luckily said, "It's okay, it'll be fine." And I told her, I said, "Well, I know it'll be fine. My only concern at the time was how long the review was going to take, because I knew that if it took too long, they would just replace me in the job and I would lose out." Yeah. And so, but it was very upsetting to me that I would give them the right answer and I would pay a price for that, while everybody that gave the wrong answer virtually paid no price at all. So, you know, but it was one of those things that 2 days later I'm back in the building, I'm doing my job, and at the time they had me basically killing Obama executive orders along with 2 other people. They handed us all the executive orders and a good number of regulations and said, "Here, figure out what to do with these." And so that's what I was doing. It was one of the greatest jobs ever, because you're just flushing garbage down the system day in, day out, and it was fun. But it was fine. I got back into my job, and then here's what happened. I had already been with the Trump in session operation for some number of years. Started in summer 2015. And so by the time you hit 2017, the reality I had at home was I had a then 7 and 11-year-old daughters. And Daddy had already been gone enough. I spent 322 nights out of 365 on the road. So it was time to come home. And so I came home, and I reopened my law office in downtown Birmingham. And it's about April, late April, and somebody calls and says, "Hey, have you looked at the AG's race?" And I said, "Do I know what?" And they said, "There's only 2 people running, and one of them is Luther Strange's deputy, who went over and asked the governor for the full appointment, and the other one was the guy who got the full appointment, but they both took meetings with him. They both asked him for stuff, and you know, they neither one of them can prosecute any of these cases. They both have to recuse because they were too closely related to him." And I said, "Well, I did not know that. Thank you." And I went home and talked to my wife about it, and we prayed on it, slept on it, and thought about it for about a week. And we finally decided that we felt called to do it, because first of all, nobody else had clean hands, and second of all, when you look at the number of lawyers in this state who are my age, who had some sort of touch with that office, It's a long list.
Yeah.
And most of them are really good people who didn't do anything wrong, but it's a long list.
Very good.
But just by the grace of God did I wind up working with Trump and Sessions instead, and therefore had no relationship with that at all. And so we decided to do that, and we got in the race, back over the summer. But that is the first hit I had with it. And so the first thing I offer is clean hands. The second thing I'll tell you I offer is I have been through a bigger fight than probably everybody else combined. Because you come off of a Trump experience, if you can work and produce with that level of turbulence and that kind of day-to-day uncertainty, and you get your job done anyway and you produce anyway, you can probably do about anything in life. So,
if you can flourish in the worst situation,
yes,
you can flourish in some.
Hey, look, Frank Sinatra was right. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. It's just, it is what it is. But I had my credit card shut down 17 times because I have a unique name and I have exposure to the dark web. We got bona fide death threats so much that they finally issued me a Secret Service badge for my lapel, and I flew around with Mike Pence on his jet inside the bubble for a while because of that. But I did. I filed all the legal filings for Florida for the fall. I negotiated delegates in the spring. I did a lot of political things. I did a lot of legal things, and in the end, we were successful. And so, which culminated with my work in Washington. And but I look at the Attorney General's office, and the reality of it is this: it needs a fresh face and some clean hands. But what else it needs is some direction. There needs to be leadership in the office. The problems that we have in this state are not problems that you can just arrest your way out of and prosecute your way out of. We have such a large number of drug sales going on that we wouldn't have the prison space to arrest everybody and throw them in jail. We have a resources issue. We have a coordination issue. These are things that law enforcement cry out for. I served as a criminal court judge for 5 years in this state, and I saw kids who are hooked on drugs stand in front of my bench, and I saw it day to day. But when you go and work in Washington and you see kind of from the 40,000 foot down view, you can see what it is we do right and what it is we do wrong, because you also get to see what other states are doing. And what we do right by far in this state is our law enforcement professionals on the ground tend to be some of the best you've ever seen anywhere. Most of them are called to do the job, and they believe it is their calling, and they do an excellent job. What I don't see is any kind of leadership support for them. They need more resources, they need more equipment, they need more training. Now, some of the law enforcement agencies in the urban areas, they get that because the county commissions supplement their budgets.
Right.
But when you get off of an interstate in this state, things start looking really bleak. You see DAs that are still running the same budget they had in 2009. It's now been 10 years ago almost. You see sheriffs who have problems keeping equipment working and have problems keeping warm bodies in jobs.
Yeah. Well, starting deputy here in Tallapoosa County is $23,400.
Yeah.
And put your life on the line.
Mm-hmm.
That's, and on a given day there'll be two deputies on that'll cover 110 miles from one end to the other. And
the minute they're on long enough, somebody else poaches them and takes them.
Right. So that's exactly what happens.
That's
train them and lose them.
Yep, train them and lose them, and you're in a constant training, a constant education mode. You never seem to catch up.
Yeah, it's a tough fix. On the other side of that, how do you do that in a state where if anybody says that you raise taxes, you won't get reelected? And that's where we keep getting into that thing.
Yeah.
As Tommy said yesterday, it's not about gutting. It's about coming in with more revenue. So how do you do that without taxing people? And he had some great ideas, but what are the thoughts there?
Great question. I'm glad you asked it. One of the things that I learned while working in D.C. was that Jeff Sessions, as U.S. Attorney General, sits on top of $2 billion a year in grant money that's already allocated every single year. It is just for law enforcement. Now, Alabama, if you take that and divide it by 50 states, we should be seeing around $40 million a year. I would argue that based on population, we should be seeing more like around $51 million a year. but 40 million should be your baseline. So we don't get anywhere near that because here's the problem. We don't apply for grants to get that money. You have to ask for it to get it. Now, here's why, and it took me some time to figure this out. The reason why Montgomery does not send grant requests to Washington with more regularity is because you have to put down what the grant money is going to be used for, right? Which means that you need to have a plan in place. And that's what we don't have. When you go and work in Washington and you look at all these states' plans, and then you look at Alabama, what is the most glaring gap is that there is no plan to fight crime. Nobody has gone to every single county and said, what is your biggest problem? What do you need to help with to fix it? And nobody has comprehensively put together a plan with, by the way, using measurable metrics so that you can see if you're doing a good job or if you're falling short. And lastly, with coordination of all assets. One of the things that I notice around here a lot, I travel the state a lot, and in the more urban counties where there's resources available, they're doing pretty well. If you look at the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office, you're talking about a budget of $33 million. Now, if you look at an average rural county, you can take a zero away from that, and you still might not have what they do.
Yeah, outside of jail, you're right.
Outside of jail.
Right.
And by the way, you mentioned jail, I'll say this too. Nobody has ever done a comprehensive look at what spaces we have. People will tell you that we lack prison beds, and that's true. But here's what nobody's ever done. Nobody has ever started a day-to-day inventory of where the available bed space is in this state in regards to county jails, mental health, and medical wards. Nobody's done that. And I talk to sheriffs all the time who say, listen, we have got spare beds here that are never used. We have called the state for years and nobody ever sends anybody over to put in these beds.
It should be easy too, because every day they have to do a census.
Yes.
And it's a simple say, we have 87 beds and 36 prisoners. They have to turn the 36 prisoners in every day. It's law. You have to file that.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be hard to keep up with it.
And here's the reality, which is so crazy to me, because in the private sector it hadn't been this way since probably 02, 03, but software doesn't talk to other software systems. Mm-hmm. So this is one of these problems that a lot of places have started fixing. Probably about half the places I visit have fixed it within the last 3 years. But you've got to have the software systems able to talk to each other. I'm not going to name counties when it comes to problems, but I know one particular county where the sheriff sends a deputy over every morning to the juvenile detention facility, and they print out on paper a list of who all stayed there last night. And then the sheriff drives it back to his office and manually types it into their system because the systems don't talk to each other. So, you know, little things. Yeah, I know. You see it everywhere, and yet these are not real tough problems to solve. But I think the biggest opportunity that exists in this state and this office this year, right now, is that whoever gets a Republican nomination should immediately in July sit down and start planning everything. And I mean, there should be absolute final opinions, Attorney General opinions. There should be legislation ready to be submitted in January. You should have all of your ducks lined up, ready to pull the trigger the minute a hand comes off the Bible. And a lot of it is easy, low-hanging fruit kind of stuff, like get the grant applications done, get the software vendors on the same page. Just start nailing these problems down, but at least compile a statewide plan where you know where you're going and you can measure the results. But, you know, our murder rate makes us the third in the nation for murder. Our core crime stats are terrible. Our drug sales are off the charts. Our violent crime rate continues to go up double-digit growth a year. That is ridiculous. I mean, that is embarrassing. You don't think of Alabama as a murder state. And it used to be that we all told ourselves, oh, that's just the big cities, and we just kind of ignored it. We did. But the problem is the problems of the big cities are now bleeding out to all the rest of the state, and you can see it. You can see it in the statistics.
Well, Chambers County has 17 murders in their jail right now that are waiting to go to trial. We've got a DA that has 5 counties.
Yeah.
He has 2 court terms a year, and so he can get 1 each term.
Yeah.
Same thing here. We've got 6 in the 4 years I've been here. We've got 6 that are waiting. We're going to get 2 of them in through trial this year. You can't do it with the resources he's got. I mean, he can't even investigate and get the forensics back.
Yeah, and that's another problem. And frankly, the other problem is this. A lot of times you're now seeing the smartphones are being the best collection of evidence, and we don't have enough ITs to service that problem. And don't even get me going on labs, because one of the urban counties, and again, I don't name names when it comes to problems, one of the DAs in the urban county said that they are 3,300 rape kits backlogged right now. Now, what if your daughter or spouse was one of those 3,300 people, or you? I mean, it would be terrible. We are basically under-resourced, and let me be clear, I don't blame the DAs. You mentioned the DAs. Every time I go into a community, somebody comes up to me and says, oh, my DA's slow. Well, I'm sorry, but I defend those guys to the hilt, because the reality of their situation is if you get down to an average Alabama county, where you're not talking one of the urban counties, if you get out to one of the average Alabama counties, you know, they saw a cut after '08 when we all hit a recession. Right. And they've never had any restoration of funding. They are still operating for 10 years now on what they had after the Great Recession. And the reality is, when you get out into most of these counties, you'll find an elected DA and 2 and sometimes 3 lawyers, and that's it. And sometimes you see part-time lawyers.
Yeah,
that's a real problem.
Yeah, it's tough, and in a lot of cases they end up having to fund themselves with court fees.
That's right.
And if they don't take in enough, I mean, that's here, I see that, then they lay off a DA or assistant DA, or an investigator. And that's what happened here last year. They had a real bad year for collections.
Yeah.
So they're using part-timers to just try to fill in where they can. So
that's really it. You're just trying to stick your finger in the holes in the dike, and we've all been living like that for a decade, and it's not getting better. Yeah. And you talking about murder cases getting backlogged like that. You know, the reality is, when you're talking about 2.5 or 3 years in some places to get a murder trial on, you know, it backs up everything else too. When a drug dealer can go in and out on a revolving door, and they're back out on the street within 24 hours, and a lot of sheriffs tell me it's within 2 hours. You know, when that person can sell drugs to a kid in your local high school and be back out in 2 hours, and the murder case is going to take 2 to 3 years to do, you know, the drug cases are taking twice as long. And that's a real problem, because it drives violent crime, it drives recidivism on all number of things, but it also drives the number of victims up. And I think that's what's lost in a lot of these conversations, is we talk statistics, but we don't talk about the victims. And I will tell you, one of the hardest things I ever had to do was, you look at drug cases when you're a judge, and I'll tell you what it looks like visually. The first time you see them, they're 17 or 18 years old. They're coming at you with a paraphernalia or a marijuana bust. And they look like a regular 17, 18-year-old boy. And I'm going to say boy because that's what most of them are. And so, you know, you see that person, and you put them into rehab, and you monitor them, and you see them on a regular basis. And you get to know these folks. And you meet mom, and you meet grandma, and you meet everybody. And here's what happens. They get out of high school, maybe they graduate, maybe they don't, but they age out of it at some point. They're 19, and you see them, and they're a little paler, and they start having the circles under the eyes, and now they're on for a bigger drug charge. And the next time you see them, they're 20 or 21. They probably have a baby or one on the way. They probably went from around 150 pounds down to around 100 pounds, and they are walking skeletons. They are pale, and they are hooked, and they're addicts. Mm-hmm. And at that point, their lives are ruined. They're 20 years old, and their lives are ruined, and there's the baby. And it happens in a span of 2 to 3 years. And it's the saddest thing you'll ever see in your life.
As far as getting I think it all kind of goes in hand to hand, because, you know, obviously we have to treat those different. We have to find a better way, you know, to not warehouse them, give them the help they need when the drug problem is much more complex than it used to be. You know, used to you just couldn't take drugs. You'd go get tested as long as you're fine. But now with the opioids, you have to be taking them to get off of them. It's a mess. Or even with the shortfall in forensics, getting the cases processed, or with the DAs, it all comes back to money. And outside of grants, what are some ways that we can creatively, fund what's needed and get some funding back?
I think that we need to start using what we have better. We could do a better job with what we have. And I think that has to be where we start. One of the things I did when I became a judge was I decided that we were not going to take the youthful, nonviolent offenders, and by the way, those are all drug offenders. We're not going to take them and throw them in a jail or prison setting where they can meet older people who will teach them the horrors of life. We need to separate those kids out from the life they've been living and try to put them into a life that would include the right track. Most of these kids are raised in homes with no clocks. You know, they've never had to keep a schedule. They are not looking at interviews and college and all that stuff. They're just not. And these are the kids that a generation ago would have stayed at home and gone to church and gotten a job, and that's what's broken down. And so what I would do was I would sentence them to work, and rather than putting them in the county jail. And I don't mean picking up trash on the side of the road. I mean a real trade. And so they would work with the Public Works Department. I remember one summer there was painting to do at the school. One summer the bleachers had to be reboarded, but they would learn some sort of trade. One of our graduates went to work at the Public Works Department because he loved it so much. We had kids washing and waxing fire trucks and cleaning the fire station. But we basically put them, to the best degree I could, we would find a way to make them work around military veterans or some other real role models. And we would give them role models. And I found that it did the best job on rehabilitation. And the moms and the grandmothers that you see in court would thank you for it. And when you're getting calls, when you're judging, you're getting calls from grandma on your personal cell phone, you know you're headed in the right direction. So I'll just say we got to use our resources better. But after that, yeah, we need more resources. There's no doubt about it. The first thing I'd like to do with resources is figure out some sort of ranking for what we need done first. And it's going to be different for every location because, I mean, people have different problems on the ground. But if somebody has got too long of a backlog on murder cases, I would love to get on top of that and start peeling away the backlog problems. The other thing I'd like to do is start getting the crime lab up to date, because that's been a continuing source of frustration.
Now, the Attorney General actually appoints the person who heads that up, but they don't oversee it. Is that the way that works?
Pretty much.
Okay. I thought that's...
It's a resource game. It's not a management game.
Right.
Yeah.
What, if you, those problems aside, what would be, we see so many times with I'll bring up gambling because it's one of those things. We see these suits that seem to take a lot of money, a lot of time to get through to what means, what end, I don't know. When at the same time we have the Porch Creek who, if a bill passes through the Senate that's already passed the House, the land that we have here that's timberland that belongs to the Porch Creek and Owa down at the beach will have casinos on because Bradley Byrne is backdooring the Indian compacts, not necessarily compacts isn't the right word, but it's legitimizing the land as being Indian land even though they bought it later.
Okay.
So what's the difference and what's the gain for an Attorney General's office to continually go after the small gaming halls where their counties have approved it and those sorts of things? I mean, why would you do that and what's the benefit of it?
Well, you know, I think the why is pretty basic at this point. Everything's been litigated on gaming. For the most part, we're getting pretty long in the tooth on that. Riley did that for the most part about a decade ago. This is not, in other words, we all know what the law is. There's not really much gray area. The state Supreme Court has ruled on this multiple times. I think at this point everybody's pretty clear on where the line is on that. To the degree that somebody steps over the line, it's the duty of law enforcement to enforce the law. And so you have to enforce, you got to enforce the law as it stands, because that's what it is. I'm not running to be a legislator, I'm running to be an Attorney General. Having said that, if the target moves, the office has to move accordingly. Because again, you are supposed to be enforcing the law as it stands. And so that's what you're bound to do. That's the oath you swear, and that's what you're supposed to uphold. I can tell you though, I think that we basically have two major problems in this state, and they are the core crime stats and resources. And I just don't see how, given the chronic problems we have. Well, let me get back to something I was saying a second ago, which is about victims. You look at the victim services that the state operates, and then you look at the fact that violent crime is increasing double digits a year, murders are going up, drug sales are off the charts. What nobody's talking about yet, but it's coming, is that we have a kind of a backlog starting with victim services. And I think that it's probably something we're going to be hearing more about as victims are generated by a growth in crime. So, you know, I think right now you can talk about resources. Right now you can talk about a crime rate, but sometime in the next 2 or 3 years, I expect that the number of victims in this state is going to go up to a catastrophic level where victim services can't keep up with it.
Well, it's already happening now. I mean,
yeah.
Tri-County Advocacy Center, which takes all the child crimes and does all the forensic interviews here for 3 counties, they had 700 victims last year.
Mm-hmm.
They did 2,100 forensic interviews with 3 people.
3 people.
And one was a part-time.
But see, you know that, and I know that.
But how do you tell that message and make people say that, hey, we got to get some money behind this?
I think that what's going to happen is within 2 or 3 years, you're not going to need to tell that message because everybody's going to know somebody. And I remember when meth first started coming out strong in this state, and I had to tell my friends about meth. Well, I don't have to do that anymore. You know why? Because every single person I know has got some family member or neighbor or friend or somebody, at least one, who's had a meth problem.
Right.
Now, I've had a cousin who's had a meth problem. It absolutely hit my family. And let me tell you what happened. My grandmother died, and right after the funeral, my mom had something from my grandmother's house that she wanted to take to her house. And she left it by the back door as they were packing the car. And at some point, the car is packed and they drive away, and they get to her house and they unpack, and maybe 2 months later, she finally discovers, oh my God, this one thing that I always wanted the most is not here. And she called around for months to all my relatives. Did you get it? Did it go to your house? And finally, we could not figure out what happened to this one thing my mother wanted the most out of her mother's house. And we get a call maybe 4 months after we were sure nobody had it. We get a call from the Mobile County Sheriff's Department. And it had been pawned in a Mobile pawn shop. And it was basically destroyed. And my mother's only item that she really wanted from her mother's house was sold to the pawn shop by a cousin of mine who was floating around that house today helping load the cars. Yeah. And that was how we all figured out that he had a meth problem.
It touches everybody.
It does. It touches everybody. And so I guess my thing to you is, I don't think we're going to have to be telling everybody about victim services or victims. I think within 2 years there will be such a chronic need out there that you will know somebody. The Birmingham murder rate has almost doubled in 3 years.
What if with that happening and all the stats you're saying, are we a better society, or are we letting those people out of jail too soon? And I think if you ask Tom Young and the judges around here, it's the latter. The sentencing guidelines have killed them.
Yes.
And they can't keep people in jail. We have, you know, I was talking about a murder suspect here who's been gotten out.
Yeah.
And keeps reoffending. Well, we can't.
You know, again, I'm not going to mention any county by name, but one of the county sheriffs told me, he said, listen, he said, the problem is there is no consequences anymore for people's actions. And he said, and the biggest problem we see now are B&Es on automobiles, breaking and entering automobiles. And we see it in broad daylight, and we see it by kids who are at mom and dad's house. They've graduated from high school, they got nothing to do, they don't have a job, and they are now breaking into cars, and we arrest them, and they're back home within 3 hours, and there's not a thing we can do. Thanks to the sentencing guidelines, we're stuck. And as long as you've got young people who are bored and no consequences, you have got a recipe for disaster. And it's playing out all over the place, and it leads to other things. And the problem with B&Es, the problem with all of this kind of stuff is, you know, you can kind of look at it the way Rudy Giuliani looked at New York. If you don't take care of your minor problems, you're only going to have major problems. And the problem we have with the sentencing guidelines is they have totally robbed every member of law enforcement of a lot of ability to take care of minor problems, to catch people when they're catchable. And I'm afraid we're about to lose a whole bunch of kids to just permanent crime because we don't do anything to stop it. There are no consequences on a lot of these actions.
I think that's.
But you asked the question, and I think it's a good one. Is are we a worse society from a criminal standpoint, or is it the sentencing guidelines? I would tell you it's both. I don't think the sentencing guidelines help. Lord knows. I mean, let's be honest. The sentencing guidelines came about because they wanted to decrease the prison population. Well, mission accomplished, but we're all paying the price for that.
Right. It's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
But when you tell people that there's fundamentally no negative effect for their criminal action, you are opening the door to all kinds of future actions. And they'll go down that path as far as they want to go before you finally do something about it.
That is so true. Well, we're about to the point we're there, but tell, just to speak to the voters for a minute. Tell people why you think that you'd be the best candidate, and what you would do the day you're elected to make this a better state for law enforcement.
Sure. I think I've already said what I'd do the day I'm elected. I intend to spend 6 months drafting a plan so that we're ready to execute the minute the hand comes off the Bible. And I think I've adequately outlined what that is. Let me tell you a little bit about me, which I probably didn't do in the front end. I'm married. I've got 2 daughters. I live in the city of Birmingham. I've been a lawyer since I got out of law school in '97. I have filed as a lawyer. I've filed in all 67 counties in Alabama and all 67 counties in Florida. I have had some interesting cases. I was very lucky, very blessed to have wound up being sent into Florida for the Gore v. Bush recount. I represented George W. Bush as part of the legal team inside Broward County in the courthouse there. I, since that time, did 3 more recounts, including the one that stopped Don Siegelman, and also Roger Bedford up in northwest Alabama. I've been involved in kind of complicated issues over time. As a judge, I had a problem where a lot of the drug dealers were dealing right over my line, and we couldn't get to them, so we needed some federal help. We needed DEA kind of help. And so Jeff Sessions helped coordinate some of that. And because of that, he said, you know, Chess, you're in your 40s now, and you can get help if you ask for it. You just need to know more people. And I said, well, how do I go about knowing more people? I work 15 hours a day, and so does my wife, and we're raising 2 kids. And he said, well, I think you should work a statewide campaign. And I thought we were talking about governor, and instead it wound up being the Trump campaign. So went on board that operation early before we had Secret Service, and it was the biggest fight of my life. And I think that it's true what they say about a man being defined not just by who his friends are, but also who his enemies are. And in the last 2 years, well, last 3 years, I mean, there's not much that I can't say. I've fought George Soros, Black Lives Matter, every Obama Democrat, every Clinton Democrat, and we came out of it just fine. Now, the end result of that is that President Trump's going to have another Supreme Court appointment here real soon because Justice Kennedy's going to retire this summer. We are about to have a conservative Supreme Court for the first time in my lifetime. Now, one of the healths of one of the other justices is questionable at best, and it may well be that President Trump gets another appointment. Now, we've always had 5-4 split courts in my life, or a liberal court when I was really younger. But I'm 47 years old in a couple of weeks here. And we are looking at the first time having a conservative court. Now, if you don't have somebody who is a known Republican, who has fought for conservative causes, you are going to lose the biggest opportunity of your life to actually strengthen the right to life, work on Second Amendment issues, work on border issues, security issues, and most of all, law enforcement issues. But it is a golden opportunity very soon to be able to push that and win at the court level. Win. Because it's not about fighting, it's about winning. And that's what I bring to the table. So first of all, I bring clean hands. I said no to Bentley. But second of all, I'm the only candidate in this race who has worked with official Washington in a personal way. I know everybody, and I look forward to utilizing all of those connections to try to get Alabama into a better situation in regards to pushing our values and moving our law enforcement community forward. And for that reason, I ask for your vote on the 5th of June, and I ask for your support. And hey, whether you like me or not, I ask for your prayers. And thank you.
Well, good deal. We appreciate your time. Thanks for talking with us, and I hope the voters reach out, learn more, and make wise decisions.
Me too. Thanks very much.
Thank you.